Good morning, guys. And it is morning. My voice is nice and crackly. It's also August 3rd, 2023. It's my birthday. Well, not really. You guys know that we always record these things in advance, and so this is no different than that. But the day this comes out will be August 3rd, 2023, and it's shelf life. Oh man, I'm so excited to do this one. Let me get straight to the title here. The book we're covering today is one of my all-time favorites, Stiff: The Curious Lives of Human Cadavers by author Mary Roach. This book, I think, is the book that launched a million books in my case. A coworker recommended this book to me in a way that I don't know if it was meant to be funny, maybe it was meant to be offensive, I'm not sure, but the idea that she said was, you're into really weird things, you're into these deep dives, blah blah blah, you should check this out. I had never heard of this book, I had never heard of Mary Roach, but she tried describing to me what the book was about, and it did raise my curiosity level, and I said, okay, I'll give it a try. Let's see what I think of it. I think I borrowed it first from somebody and immediately after finishing reading it, got my own copy of it. I had to have this book, no doubt about it. And when I now see the name Mary Roach, I usually have a hard time picking favorites, so I said this book is one of my favorites, so it's one of several others that I just really treasure. I can say I think Mary Roach might be my favorite author. I've got a number of books from her, not all of her books, but I would like to get them all at some point, and I will be covering the ones that I do have at some point in the future for sure. But when I see her name associated with a book, I kind of don't even care about the topic because I know exactly how she's going to cover it. It's going to be down to earth, it's going to be funny, and it's going to just inform the hell out of me. And that's what this book does. Now, you should be seeing already, it's a nonfiction book, which most of what I cover will be, in that the topic is death and science. If you couldn't tell from the title, she doesn't actually cover just one topic within a topic. She picks subtopics for each chapter under one topic, and she does a great job of covering them. She has interviewed some really fascinating people with jobs or specialties that are just things you don't think people do unless if you happen to know somebody who does them. I feel like I really, really want people to go out and read this book if they haven't, though maybe trigger warning here because we are talking about death. I'm not comfortable with death, and it's certainly not my own, and I don't like it when people I know are gone. I don't wish death upon anybody, even my worst enemy, whoever that might be. So this can be a little tough, but it is approaching it more from a scientific point of view, and you can learn some really amazing things here. I have certain topics that stick out to me in this book that I'm going to share with you guys briefly. I'm not going to cover it like she did, of course. I want you to get the book, not just listen to me. But here are some of the things covered in the book that I have some distinctive memories of from the times that I've read it in the past, and this will give you an idea of exactly what topics about death she's covering in here. There's more. I'm covering less than half of them here on the list of things that I remember the most. So the first one is plastic surgery practice, which is a really incredible idea that seems so obvious in hindsight. It's the idea that how do plastic surgeons get so good at what they do? How do they know what's going to work and get used to the anatomy? You can't just snap a person right off the street and be like, your ears and nose are mine now. They're not going to allow that to happen. So one of the ways you can do that is through using cadavers to practice on, based on, what was the cause of death of the person, and does it somehow relate to plastic surgery in some way? I think there's some people who might be mad about this idea because when we use the word plastic surgery, when we use that term, we often think, I want to look pretty. But that's not really the main thing done in plastic surgery. It's usually reconstructive because of a bad accident or something that has happened that will allow a person to be able to feel comfortable in our society going out and about their lives again. And not to mention, sometimes it's actually just about returning function that had been lost from whatever had happened. So plastic surgery, I think people turn their nose up at it in some cases that they really shouldn't, because it is super important. So I'm glad there is a way for this to be practiced on so it could be done well. She covers the history also of body snatching, the idea that in some of the earlier days of anatomical science practices, how do you practice on cadavers when there's nobody exactly offering themselves up as one? And so it talks about people who worked with grave diggers and burial sites, usually illegally, usually under the table, to get bodies in the hands of people who are just trying to learn and don't have an avenue to do so. Now, I can't remember for sure off the top of my head if she covered this one little fact that I always found really fascinating or not. So this may or may not be in this book, but it certainly relates. I had learned at some point a while ago, and I think it's true, I could always be wrong, that we developed the practices of bleedings and using leeches in large part because of bad assumptions as a result of body snatching. A lot of the times when we were talking about yellow humors and biles and the need to bleed a body as a way to heal the person, it often had to do with the idea that our organs are engorged. They're larger than they should be. And this was based on bodies that had been stolen, that had then been examined, and they started to get a number of different pieces of organs and saying, okay, here's the range of hearts we have. Let's measure the crap out of them. And then let's do some simple math and find out what's the average size of a heart, and you do that for stomachs and livers and lungs and on and on and on. And they started to build what was considered the right size, quote unquote. But that was a bad assumption on those sizes because of whose body they could get. Body stealing was a known quantity back in the days when it was a thing and such a common thing. You could actually only steal the corpses of those who were poor. Because if you were wealthy, you're talking about cemetery grounds that would be guarded, have walls and some other security measures that just made it less likely you would be successful in your attempt to get one of these bodies. But for poor people, you're not going to get that at all. They're wide open, maybe a fence, a gate that doesn't exist. Nobody's there watching these bodies. It's late at night. Bring a shovel, go to town. Well, the thing is, especially back in those days, if you were poor, you were probably malnourished, specifically undernourished. So their bones would be less dense. Their organs would be smaller because they themselves would be smaller and have less nutrition in them. And we just built up this assumption on these numbers based on that. And it kind of led us down an initial bad path. Thankfully, we are smart, even though it doesn't always seem like it. And we were able to figure this mess out over time. And we do much better today. And we don't recommend people bleed. Here's another one that was really fascinating to me. Decay farms. Decay farms are... You're probably picturing something and you're going, no, that's too weird. But it's kind of right. It's the idea that there is a plot of land with corpses that are just laying there on the ground in the sun or whatever the weather happens to be. And it turns out, yeah, that's exactly what they're doing and what they're supposed to do. it's really fascinating. It's all about measuring the different ways and under what conditions a body will decay over time, especially in open elements. This seems morbid, right? Like, why do this? It almost seems insulting to the body, but it turns out it is a really important function of law enforcement. This is how we know. You watch those crime dramas. Oh, so-and-so died approximately 3 days ago. Well, how do they know that? How do they know it's 3 days ago? It's not like every time we die, we quickly scratch out the date and time. Well, they can get a really good idea. Are they inside or outside? What's the weather been like? And how far along are they in the various stages of decay? Thanks to these decay farms, they have better ideas for that. We'll go second to last here. Crash test dummies. Yep, there's been times when corpses have been used for crash tests, not just those plastic people with the weird 2-color 4-quadrant circle shape thing. I don't know what that's called. It's like a Simon Says thing, the toy version. Not only for crash testing, but also for other safety tests, including the use of explosives and guns to see not only what kind of damage do these crashes and these weapons have on the body, but also a way to test the equipment that is meant to reduce that damage or maybe avoid it entirely. Another example where people think, oh, this is kind of insulting to the body, but there's an important thing that I'm going to say at the end about why this really shouldn't be viewed as insulting. And I think it's obvious also too why it would be useful to have an actual body and not a mock-up that's been made cheaply and simply and just hopefully gets enough of the job done. A recent issue here in the Chicagoland area, or I should say the state of Illinois, and I know we're not the only ones who've dealt with this or will deal with this over time, we are seeing a lot of people trying to get the right to have their body disposed of by design in a way of composting. People will want to have their body help grow a tree or some other sort of plant so that it provides them with the feeling of the final way they can give back something, hopefully something lasting and something useful, while also avoiding the limited space we have and the way that we would prepare ourselves so that nothing of us returns to the planet. Not everybody's going to feel like that's the right way to do things, of course, but some people do, and there's been a lot of fights recently in Illinois about finally pushing that to make it an option. That's kind of, I wanted to bring all this to the end of it. What I find fascinating is there's a phrase that I had always heard, never thought about it too much, and this book actually makes clear what that phrase is talking about. And it's that question of, what do you want when you die? A lot of people think about what kind of funerary services do you want, but also how do you want to be interred or placed or something like that. And people are usually thinking, do they want to be buried in a cemetery? Do they want to be cremated? Do they want to be shot into space? Who knows? You know, there's a lot of different options out there. A lot of people scatter ashes, and of course there's some issues with scattering ashes as well, legally and environmentally also. But one of the things that tends to get discussed is the idea of, I'm donating my body to science. And the question is, what does that mean? And it turns out this book covers what that means. It could be that your body will be preserved and then sent to a medical school, and people who are going through the rigorous training process of becoming doctors, surgeons, what have you, turns out they can practice on what remains of you and hopefully then go on and help more people get over the various conditions they're dealing with. You could also be in a decay farm. You can also be used for plastic surgery. You can have somebody fire a new gun at you. So there's lots of options. And she actually covers pretty neatly how something like that works, and how the decisions of your finality aren't entirely final, based on exactly what's in your will, should you have one, who has the power to say what and when. And I just found this book extremely informative, and I've read it more than once. Just talking about it, I want to read it again. But I can't. I've got a stack of 6 books on my nightstand right now that I really need to get down. But I highly recommend this for people who are into science-based books. I find this fantastic. And if you're worried, I don't have a head for science, that's not a problem when it comes to books by Mary Roach. She knows how to communicate through her pages, and you feel less like you're reading a science book and more like you're hearing your nutty friend who has this really strange life, who talks to the weirdest people, and it's just all fascinating. I cannot recommend this book enough. And like I said, I do have some of her other books off the top of my head. I have Packing for Mars, I have Bonk, I don't have Grunt. Grunt is a little newer, I haven't gotten that yet, I do want it. I feel like I'm forgetting one other than Stiff. I can't think of it. I'm not gonna just sit here and make you guys wait while I try to remember it. But yeah, if any of the book, this is probably like the most important book I've covered so far on this show, and this was the one. That coworker gave me this recommendation. I took her up on it, fell in love with the book, fell in love with Mary Roach, and immediately fell back in love with reading again, that at that point I had not been spending a whole lot of time doing, and now it's just one of my major hobbies. And with that, I'm going to leave you, but not in the way of death, at least not yet. I hope there's going to be a long time before that comes up. Thanks for joining me, guys, and I will talk to you in this way next month.